The midday sun hammered the town of Silver Creek into a state of stunned silence. Heat radiated in shimmering waves from the packed dirt of the main street, making the distant mesas tremble. It was the kind of heat that drove sane men indoors and baked the ambition out of even the most determined souls. That was why the sudden crack of gunfire was so offensive. It was a violent tear in the fabric of the afternoon's lethargy. 3 gunshots fired in quick succession shattered the quiet. They were followed by a chorus of panicked shouts and the splintering crash of the Silver Creek Bank's front window. Men in dusty hats poured out of the saloon hands hovering near their hips. Women snatched children from the boardwalks. Within seconds, the street was a chaotic scene of alarm and confusion. From the shade of the livery stable where he'd been negotiating the price of hay, Cole Hartman felt the sound in his bones. It was a language he had spent years trying to unlearn, a violent grammar that had once defined his life. He was a rancher now, a man whose concerns were meant to be cattle, and seasons not bullets and blood. Yet his body reacted before his mind could object. His shoulders squared, his gaze sharpened, and his hand instinctively went to the empty space on his belt where a U.S. Marshal's Colt Peacemaker used to hang. He saw them then, 3 riders, their faces obscured by grimy bandanas, bursting from the bank with heavy canvas sacks. One of them fired a shot into the air, a wild, ragged sound meant to sow fear. People scrambled for cover. A horse tethered to the hitching post outside the general store screamed in terror. Cole's eyes fixed on the animal. It was a magnificent gray mare, her coat the color of polished pewter, her lines as elegant as a line of poetry. He knew the horse. She belonged to an old prospector named Silas, a man with more stories than gold who treated the mare like his own child. As the robbers mounted their horses, another shot rang out. It wasn't aimed at the sky. This one was low and careless. The gray mare jerked violently, her body convulsing as if struck by lightning. A dark, wet stain blossomed on her flank. She staggered, her legs buckling, and collapsed into the dust with a sound that was half groan, half sob. A cold, familiar rage seized Cole. He moved without thinking, his long, dormant instincts taking over. He strode out from the livery, his steps measured and deliberate, his eyes locked on the robbers now fumbling with their reins. The world seemed to slow down, the frantic shouts of the townsfolk fading to a dull roar. All he saw were the men who had just killed a beautiful, blameless creature for nothing more than the convenience of their escape. "Hold it right there." Cole's voice was not a shout, but it carried across the street with the flat, hard authority of a lawman. The leader of the gang, a hulking man with a thick, dark beard, turned in his saddle. His eyes, visible above the bandana, narrowed with surprise and then contempt. "Get out of the way, old man, unless you want to join that horse in the dirt." Cole kept walking, his hands open at his sides. He was unarmed, a fact that seemed to amuse the robber. But there was something in Cole's advance, a complete absence of fear, that wiped the smirk from the man's eyes. From the sheriff's office, a young deputy, Finn O'Connell, appeared, his revolver drawn, but held with the uncertain tremor of a man who had never before faced down armed men. "Drop your weapons!" Finn yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of duty and terror. The situation escalated in a heartbeat. The robbers, seeing the law, spurred their horses. One of them turned and fired a wild shot in Finn's direction. Cole reacted instantly, shoving the young deputy back into the doorway just as a bullet splintered the wood where his head had been. In that split second of distraction, the robbers were gone, thundering down the street and disappearing in a cloud of red dust. The immediate danger had passed, but the silence that followed was heavy with tragedy. Finn, pale and breathing hard, leaned against the doorframe. "They're gone," he stammered. You saved my life." Cole barely heard him. His attention was fixed on the street where the gray mare lay in a spreading pool of her own blood. He walked over the dust, muffling his footsteps, and knelt beside the dying animal. Silas, the old prospector, was already there, his face a mask of anguish as he stroked the mare's neck, whispering her name over and over. The mare's breathing was a ragged, shallow rattle. Her beautiful eyes, once full of fire, were glazed with pain and confusion. Cole placed a hand on her flank, feeling the last faint tremors of life. It was then that he saw it. Burned into the mare's hide just above the wound was a small distinctive brand, a single arrow cleanly snapped in the middle. A broken arrow. The symbol struck Cole like a physical blow. The dusty street of Silver Creek, dissolved, replaced by a memory he had fought for years to bury. He was back in the canyons of the Tularosa Basin, the air thick with the smell of gunpowder and fear. A young outlaw no older than 20 lay dead at his feet, his eyes wide with the shock of his own mortality. Cole's own gun was still smoking in his hand, and on the saddle of the boy's horse, a tool-stamped leather carving of that same symbol, a broken arrow. He had killed a man that day. It was a clean shoot the boy had drawn on him, but the memory had been a stone in his gut ever since. It was the day he had unpinned his marshal's badge and walked away seeking a quiet life where the only conflicts were with the land and the sky. Cole Silas's voice, thick with grief, pulled him back to the present. Cole looked down. The gray mare had gone still. Her last breath had escaped her. He looked at the brand and the jagged line of the break seared into her hide, and a cold dread settled over him. It wasn't a coincidence. He knew it with a certainty that chilled him to the bone. The past he had tried so desperately to outrun had just ridden into his town and shot an old man's horse dead in the street. In the weeks that followed the robbery, a tense quiet settled over Silver Creek. The initial shock gave way to a simmering unease. The town was a raw, burgeoning place, clawing its existence out of the harsh New Mexico landscape. The scent of fresh-cut pine from the new saloon construction mingled with the metallic tang of Elias Boone's blacksmith forge. The discordant notes of a tinny piano from the old saloon clashed with the rhythmic clang of Boone's hammer on steel, creating a soundtrack of anxious progress. The red sand glowing under the sun seemed to bleed into the dusty streets, coating everything in a fine, rust-colored powder. Cole Hartman felt the town's tension as if it were his own. He retreated back into the solitude of his ranch, but the peace he had once found there was gone. The image of the dead mare and the broken arrow brand haunted his waking hours. He found himself in his barn late at night, not mending tack, but methodically cleaning his old service revolver, the metal cool and heavy in his hands. He would break it down, oil each part with practiced efficiency, and reassemble it, the familiar clicks of the mechanism, a grim comfort. But when he was done, he would wrap it in an oiled cloth and place it back in its locked wooden box. He never wore it. Wearing it would be an admission that his past was not truly past. His interactions in town became clipped and functional. He avoided conversations that strayed too close to the robbery, especially when Deputy Finn tried to thank him again. Finn, barely 22, was all earnest ambition and misplaced reverence. He saw Cole not as a rancher, but as the legendary marshal he'd heard stories about, a man who could face down death without flinching. "If you hadn't been there, Cole, I'd be dead," Finn said one afternoon, catching him outside the general store. "You'd have handled it," Cole replied gruffly, not meeting the young man's eyes. "Maybe, but you didn't even hesitate. It's like you knew exactly what to do." Cole's jaw tightened. "Instincts die hard, Finn, that's all." He turned and walked away, leaving the deputy looking after him with a mixture of admiration and confusion. Only with Elias Boone, the blacksmith, did Cole find any semblance of normalcy. Boone was a man forged from the same elements as the iron he worked, sturdy, weathered, and unyielding. His forge was the heart of the town, and he saw everything from its fiery glow. He knew about Cole's past, and unlike Finn, he wasn't impressed by it. He was wary. He'd seen what a life of violence did to a man. Heard Silas passed on this morning. Boone said one day, not looking up from the horseshoe he was shaping. The old prospector had been grazed by a stray bullet during the robbery, and the wound, seemingly minor, had festered. Cole knotted his throat tight. He'd been visiting Silas, listening to the old man's rambling stories, knowing they were his last. The doctor said his heart gave out. Grief will do that. Boone grunted, plunging the glowing shoe into a trough of water. Steam hissed, filling the forge with a sharp, clean smell. He hung the shoe on a hook and finally turned to face Cole, his gray eyes searching. That robbery wasn't about the money. Cole looked at him surprised. What makes you say that? Because they left most of it behind, Boone said, wiping his hands on a rag. Finn was telling me. They broke the window, grabbed a few sacks near the door, and ran. The real cash in the vault was untouched. Boone's gaze was pointed. It was a distraction, Cole. Loud and messy. Meant to draw every eye in town. The pieces began to click into place in Cole's mind. The carelessness of the robbery. The shooting of the mayor. It wasn't random. It was targeted. The inciting incident came that evening. Cole was at Silas's small, tidy cabin, helping the undertaker prepare the old man's body. On the bedside table, among a collection of worn-out tools and interesting rocks, was a framed, faded photograph of the gray mare. It was there that the undertaker handed Cole a sealed, wrinkled envelope. He asked me to give this to you. Said it was important. Cole opened it later, sitting on his porch as the sun bled across the horizon. It was a short, scrawled letter written in a weak hand. Cole. That mare they shot, Luna. She wasn't alone. Just a few weeks ago she dropped a foal, a little silver-gray filly just like her. I left her with the herd up in the Red Canyon Basin. She was too young to make the journey to town. They're leaderless now, wild. But that little one is out there. The man who led that gang. I saw his face when his bandana slipped. A man named Briggs. Marcus Briggs. He's a cruel one. He's been seen scouting the canyons looking for that silver herd. He's a horse catcher. And don't let him get that foal, Cole. Don't let him put his chains on Luna's baby. She's the last of her line, the Broken Arrow line. My father bred them. They deserve to run free. Silas. Cole read the letter twice, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. Marcus Briggs. The name was a venomous whisper in the saloons and ranches across the territory, a man known for his brutal methods of capturing and breaking wild mustangs. It all made a sickening kind of sense. The robbery was a cover. They weren't after the bank's money, they were after the horse. They had intended to steal her, but something went wrong, and their carelessness got her killed. And now Briggs was after the next best thing, her foal. He walked into town the next morning, his mind made up. He found Finn in the sheriff's office, poring over wanted posters. I'm riding out to the Red Canyons, Cole said without preamble. Finn looked up. More stray cattle. No, I'm looking for a foal, the one that belonged to Silas's mare. Finn frowned, confused. Cole, that's wild country, and Briggs's gang was last seen heading that way. We've got a posse organizing, but Sheriff Miller wants to wait for the marshal from Santa Fe. It's too dangerous. He lowered his voice. They're just horses, Cole. It's not a marshal's business anymore. Some things are, Cole said, his voice quiet but absolute. The words hung in the air, a declaration that this was about more than a horse. It was about a promise to a dead friend. It was about the broken arrow. It was about a past that refused to stay buried. Later in the saloon, he overheard two of Briggs's men. He recognized them from descriptions. One was Hank, a brute of a man, with fists like stones, who spoke in monosyllabic grunts. The other, Roy, was thin and fidgety, his words spilling out in a nervous torrent. Briggs is madder than a hornet, Roy was saying, his eyes darting around the room. Said that old man's horse was the one, the last one. Now he's got to track the whole herd just for the foal. Hank just grunted. He'll get it, always does. I don't know, Roy whispered, leaning closer. This feels different. He's not thinking about the money this time. It's personal. Cole finished his drink, the whiskey burning a cold trail down his throat. He stood up and walked out his course set. The desert awaited, and somewhere in its vast, unforgiving expanse, a man driven by a dark obsession was hunting the last remnant of a legacy Cole was now bound to protect. Cole's journey was no longer a simple ride. It was an investigation. The desert sun was a merciless hammer, but he barely noticed the heat. His focus was singular, his senses honed by years of tracking men who didn't want to be found. He followed the trail left by Briggs's gang, a clear, arrogant path of churned earth and carelessly discarded refuse. They weren't trying to hide. They believed no one would dare follow. The trail led him to an abandoned homestead nestled in a shallow, sun-baked arroyo. The cabin was little more than a collapsing skeleton of weathered wood, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the endless expanse of rock and sand. Cole dismounted his horse, Ranger snorting uneasily at the scent of stale sweat and decay that clung to the air. The evidence of Briggs's cruelty was everywhere. In the makeshift corral, he found a dead coyote, its legs still caught in a crude iron trap. Briggs's men hadn't even bothered to put the animal out of its misery. Cole's jaw tightened. This was the work of men who found sport in suffering. He scanned the ground, his eyes piecing together the story. 3 men had camped here, their fire pit cold but recent. They had eaten and moved on their boot prints, heading deeper into the canyons. As he was about to leave, a glint of metal half buried in the dust near the cabin's dilapidated porch caught his eye. He knelt and brushed away the sand. It was a small, tarnished silver locket, oval-shaped and intricately carved with floral patterns around the edge. The clasp was broken. It must have been dropped, its loss unnoticed. Cole pried it open with the tip of his knife. Inside, protected by a small pane of yellowed glass, was a faded tintype photograph. It showed a woman with a gentle, tired smile, her hair pulled back severely. Beside her stood a young boy, perhaps 10 years old, with dark, intense eyes and a defiant set to his mouth. There was a fierce, protective pride in the way the woman's hand rested on the boy's shoulder. It was a portrait of a family that had known hardship, but also love. Cole frowned. It seemed entirely out of place, a fragile piece of sentimentality, in a place defined by brutality. Who did this belong to? Briggs? It didn't fit the man's reputation. He slipped the locket into his pocket, a nagging sense of unease settling over him. It was a clue, but to a puzzle he didn't yet understand. He was so engrossed in the discovery that he didn't hear them approach. Well, look what we have here. The voice, a low rumble, came from behind him. Cole straightened slowly, turning to face Hank and Roy. The big man, Hank, held a revolver leveled at Cole's chest, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Roy stood a few paces behind him, looking nervous, but holding a rifle with shaking hands. Lost something, Hartman, Hank sneered. Cole's eyes flickered between the 2 men. He had made a rookie mistake letting his guard down. Just admiring the view, he said, his voice calm. "You've been following us," Hank accused, taking a step forward. "Briggs ain't gonna like that. He don't like people poking their noses in his business." "This became my business when you shot an old man's horse in my town," Cole retorted. Hank laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "That was an accident. The boss wanted that mare alive. But her foal will do just fine, and you ain't getting in the way of that." He gestured with his gun. "Now drop the rifle. Slow." Cole let his Winchester slide from his shoulder, letting it fall to the dust. He raised his hand slowly. He knew he couldn't win in a straight fight. Hank was bigger, and Roy, though nervous, had a rifle. He needed to outthink them. "What's the plan?" Hank Cole asked, keeping his tone conversational. "Going to shoot an unarmed man that'll sit well with the sheriff back in Silver Creek." "We ain't gonna shoot you," Hank said, his smile widening. "We're just gonna leave you here, without your horse, your gun, or your water. The desert will do the rest. It's cleaner that way." As Hank spoke, Cole's eyes darted past him to the crumbling wall of the old cabin. A heavy wooden beam, rotted through at its base, was precariously balanced against the collapsing roof. An idea, desperate and dangerous, took root. "You're making a mistake," Cole said, taking a deliberate step to his left, drawing Hank's attention with him. Roy shifted uneasily, repositioning his rifle. "The only mistake was you following us," Hank growled. He started to walk toward Ranger, intending to slap the horse and send it running. Now, in one fluid motion, Cole dropped to the ground, grabbing a fist-sized rock from the dirt. He hurled it not at Hank, but at the rotted base of the cabin wall just below the leaning beam. The rock struck with a dull thud. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protesting wood, the beam gave way. It crashed down with a tremendous splintering sound, kicking up a massive cloud of dust and debris right where Hank had been about to step. Hank yelled in surprise and terror, stumbling backward to avoid the falling timber. The distraction was all Cole needed. He launched himself forward, not at Hank, but at the nervous Roy. He slammed into the smaller man, driving his shoulder into Roy's gut. The rifle flew from Roy's hands as he gasped for air and collapsed. Cole snatched up the rifle, just as Hank recovered, spinning around with a roar of fury, his revolver coming up. But he was too late. Cole had the rifle leveled, the sight centered on Hank's broad chest. "Drop it," Cole commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Hank froze, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He looked from the rifle to Cole's unwavering eyes and saw the grim resolve there. Slowly, grudgingly, he let his revolver fall into the dust. Cole didn't kill them. The thought crossed his mind it would be the easy final solution, but he pushed it away. He was not that man anymore. He disarmed them, then used their own ropes to tie them securely to what was left of the corral fence. "You'll regret this, Hartman," Hank spat, straining against the ropes. Cole ignored him. He retrieved his Winchester and mounted Ranger. He looked down at the two men, their faces contorted with helpless fury. "Someone will find you in a day or two. Gives you time to think about the kind of men you want to be." He nudged Ranger into a canter, leaving the abandoned homestead and its prisoners behind. The silver locket felt heavy in his pocket. Briggs was more than just a cruel horse catcher. The locket proved that. It hinted at a past, a loss, a motive that went deeper than greed. And as Cole rode deeper into the canyons, he knew that finding the foal was only the beginning. He was riding toward a confrontation that had started years ago in another canyon with a boy who wore a broken arrow on his saddle. The canyons deepened, their red rock walls rising like silent ancient cathedrals on either side of him. The air grew still and heavy. Cole followed the tracks, which were now mixed with the delicate, unshod prints of a herd of mustangs. Briggs was close. He could feel it. He finally found them in a secluded box canyon. A small spring trickled from the rock face, creating a patch of green that had drawn the wild herd. And there, at the edge of the herd, was a sight that made his blood run cold. A silver-gray mare, her ribs showing through a dusty coat, was chained to a heavy iron stake driven deep into the ground. A thick iron cuff was clamped around her neck. Beside her, trembling on spindly legs, was a foal no more than a few weeks old, its coat the same shimmering silver as its mother's. It wasn't Silas's mare Luna, but it was undoubtedly from the same line. Briggs, having lost the mother, had found another. He was repeating his cruel strategy: chain the mare, and her maternal instinct would keep the far more valuable foal from running. The sight was more sinister now, colored by everything Cole knew and suspected about Briggs. This wasn't just business. It felt like a ritual of cruelty. As Cole dismounted and began the slow, cautious process of freeing the mare, his mind drifted. The clinking of the chain, the fearful look in the horse's eyes, the oppressive heat of the canyon, it all converged, pulling him back into the past. He was suddenly haunted by flashes of the memory he had so long suppressed. Then the sun is blinding. Gunsmoke hangs in the air, acrid and choking. He sees the young outlaw's face, not a hardened criminal, but a boy, his eyes wide with a desperate, cornered fear. The boy raises his pistol, his hand shaking. Cole's own gun is already up. He shouts a warning, "Drop it, son," but the boy, consumed by panic, fires. The shot goes wild. Cole's training takes over. He squeezes the trigger. The explosion is deafening. The boy stumbles back, a look of profound surprise on his face as he clutches his chest. He falls. The broken arrow on his saddle seems to mock Cole from the dust. Cole shook his head, trying to clear the images, his hands trembling as he worked a length of rope around the iron stake. The details of that day were hazy, blurred by guilt and time. All he truly remembered was the dead outlaw's face and the crushing weight of having taken a life, no matter how justified. Back in Silver Creek, Deputy Finn O'Connell couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The bank robbery didn't add up. He started his own quiet investigation, speaking to the bank teller, the manager, and the few witnesses who hadn't been hiding under a table. A single crucial fact emerged, and the stolen money was all small bills taken from the teller's drawer. The saddlebags the robbers carried were heavy, but not with gold or silver. They were stuffed with paper. Finn spent a day riding the trail the robbers had taken. A few miles out of town, he found what he was looking for. One of the canvas sacks lay discarded in a ditch, its contents scattered by the wind, not money, but old ledgers, property deeds, and claim filings, all stolen from the bank manager's private office. He gathered the soaked, dirt-stained papers. Why would anyone risk their life to steal these? He brought his findings to Sheriff Miller, a portly, complacent man who preferred paperwork to police work. Miller waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, Finn. They were sloppy, that's all. Stole the wrong bags. The case is closed until the marshal gets here." But Finn wasn't convinced. He saw a pattern where Miller saw chaos. The robbery, the shooting of Silas's horse, the theft of these specific documents, it was all connected. He realized with a jolt that the robbery wasn't a robbery at all. It was a cover for something else entirely. And it had something to do with land. With a growing sense of dread, he began the laborious process of sorting through the damaged papers, looking for a name, a clue, anything that would explain why Marcus Briggs had declared war on their town. Deep in the canyon, Cole finally managed to wrench the stake from the ground, using Ranger's strength, just as he'd seen in his mind's eye. The mare was free from the earth, though still shackled by the heavy iron collar. He was coaxing the mare and her frightened foal toward a more sheltered alcove, when a cold, articulate voice echoed from the canyon rim above. "I knew you'd come, Hartman." Cole froze. He looked up. Marcus Briggs stood silhouetted against the sky, a rifle resting in the crook of his arm. He wasn't alone. Hank and a newly freed but sullen Roy stood on either side of him. "You're a harder man to kill than I thought," Briggs said, his voice devoid of heat, carrying a chilling precision, "but your luck has just run out." Briggs and his men made their way down a narrow path, effectively cornering Cole in the back of the canyon. There was no escape. Cole gently pushed the mare and foal behind him, his hand resting on the stock of his Winchester. "It's over." Briggs Cole said, his voice steady. "Leave the horses. Ride out of here and I won't come after you." Briggs let out a short, humorless laugh. "You still don't understand, do you? You think this is about horses and money?" He stopped a dozen paces from Cole, his eyes burning with an intensity that went far beyond simple greed. "This is about justice." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a tarnished silver locket. It was identical to the one Cole had found at the homestead. Briggs opened it and held it out. "Look familiar." Cole's blood ran cold. He pulled the locket from his own pocket, his mind reeling. "I wondered where my brother's locket had gone," Briggs said softly. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place with brutal force. The boy in the photograph, the young outlaw in the canyon, Briggs's brother. "The boy you killed 5 years ago," Briggs continued, his voice a low, venomous growl. "That was my brother Thomas. He was 20 years old." Cole stared at him, speechless. The hazy memories sharpened with horrifying clarity. "The bank you saw us rob," Briggs went on, his words cutting like shards of glass. "It's owned by a man named Abernathy, the same man who cheated my family out of our ranch after our father died. He used fraudulent deeds, the very papers I took from his office, to steal our land, our legacy. That act of theft sent my brother down a criminal path. He was trying to get back what was ours." Briggs took a step closer, his face a mask of cold fury. "You didn't just stop a robbery that day, Marshal. You murdered my brother in cold blood while he was trying to reclaim his birthright. You were the law, and you served a thief." He gestured to the silver mare who stood trembling behind Cole. "This mare, she is the last direct descendant of my mother's favorite horse, the one she raised on that stolen land. I'm not capturing her for money. I'm taking back the last living piece of my family. The last thing that vile man Abernathy hasn't tainted or destroyed." The entire conflict was reframed. This wasn't a story of a cruel horse catcher and a compassionate rancher. It was a deeply personal war, a battle over memory, justice, and vengeance. And Cole Hartman was standing right in the middle of it, the ghost of a dead boy hanging between him and the man who sought to avenge him. "I want 2 things," Hartman Briggs said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "My family's horse and your life." The weight of Briggs's revelation settled over Cole like a shroud. He was no longer a hero protecting the innocent. In Briggs's eyes, he was the villain, the final obstacle in a long and bitter quest for retribution. "It wasn't murder," Briggs Cole said, his voice strained. "Your brother drew on me." "He was a scared boy," Briggs roared, the cold precision in his voice finally cracking to reveal the raw grief beneath. "You were a U.S. Marshal. You could have disarmed him. You could have wounded him. But you shot to kill. You were an executioner for a land thief." Cole had no answer. The guilt he had carried for 5 years now had a name and a face staring at him with burning, accusatory eyes. Knowing he couldn't win a direct confrontation, Briggs played his next card. He didn't try to fight Cole in the canyon. He simply mounted his horse, his men following suit. "Keep the horse for now, Hartman," he called down, his voice once again controlled and menacing. But know this, the town of Silver Creek is about to learn the truth about their quiet, respectable rancher. They're about to learn that you were a corrupt marshal who helped a rich man steal from a poor family. Let's see who they believe. With that, he and his men rode away, leaving Cole alone with the mare, the Foal, and the crushing burden of the past. Briggs was true to his word. He rode into Silver Creek not as a wanted outlaw, but as a wronged man seeking justice. He used a portion of the money he claimed was rightfully his family's, to buy rounds at the saloon, his articulate, sorrowful tale winning over the drifters and the disenfranchised. He painted a vivid picture: the noble Briggs family cheated out of their land by the powerful land baron Abernathy, and their youngest son Thomas gunned down by Abernathy's hired gun, a corrupt marshal named Cole Hartman. The rumors spread like a brush fire. To a town full of people who had their own suspicions about the wealthy and powerful, the story was easy to believe. Cole's quiet, reserved nature was reinterpreted as sullen guilt. His solitary life was no longer seen as peaceful, but as the penance of a man with a dark secret. To solidify his position, Briggs orchestrated his masterstroke. One night, the town's main hay barn, the one Cole had been negotiating at on the day of the robbery, went up in flames. It was a terrifying spectacle, the fire lighting up the night sky. The next morning, a witness, a drifter well paid with Briggs's money, claimed he saw Cole Hartman riding away from the barn just before the flames erupted. The town turned on him. "He's trying to destroy us," someone shouted at an impromptu town meeting. "First the robbery, now this," another cried. "He brings nothing but trouble." Elias Boone stood up for him. "This is madness," he boomed, his blacksmith's voice silencing the crowd. "I've known Cole for years. He's a good man. You're letting this snake Briggs twist you with lies." But the fear was too strong. Deputy Finn, caught in the middle, was torn. He respected Cole, who had saved his life. But Briggs had presented him with copies of the stolen deeds showing clear signs of forgery in Abernathy's favor. The evidence seemed to support Briggs's story. When Sheriff Miller issued a warrant for Cole's arrest for questioning about the fire, Finn was tasked with bringing him in. Cole, meanwhile, had taken the mare and foal to a hidden spring high in the hills above his ranch. He was an outcast, a hunted man. He had to clear his name while protecting the two animals that were now the symbol of the entire conflict. Finn found him there at dusk, riding up the trail alone. "Cole," he called out, his voice heavy with conflict. "I have a warrant." Cole stood by the spring, not reaching for his weapon. The mare and foal stood behind him, watching Finn with wary eyes. "You believe him, Finn?" Finn dismounted, his face a portrait of turmoil. "I don't know what to believe. Briggs has proof Abernathy stole his land. He says you were part of it." "I wasn't," Cole said simply. "I was just the lawman who answered the call. I didn't know anything about the land deal." He looked at the young deputy, seeing the struggle in his eyes. "Finn, what does your gut tell you?" Finn looked from Cole's steady gaze to the two horses, who seemed to trust this man completely. He thought of Cole shoving him out of the path of a bullet, of the quiet decency he had always sensed in him. "My gut tells me you're not a barn burner," he admitted. "But the law is the law. Sheriff Miller wants you in a cell." "And what does Briggs want?" Cole asked. "He wants you to face him, alone, at dawn in the Red Rock Canyons. He says it's between you and him. If you come, he'll tell the town the fire was an accident and leave for good." It was a trap. Cole knew it. Briggs wouldn't honor any deal. But it was also his only chance. "Tell him I'll be there," Cole said. "But Finn, you keep digging into those papers. There's more to this story. Find the truth." Finn nodded, a new resolve hardening his features. "I will." He turned to leave, then paused. "Be careful, Cole. He isn't just looking for a fight. He's looking for revenge." As Finn rode away, Cole looked up at the vast star-filled sky. He was alone, his name disgraced, with the full weight of a town's fear and a vengeful man's hatred bearing down on him. He was being forced back into the role he had abandoned, the lawman, the gunslinger. But this time, he wasn't fighting for a badge or a government. He was fighting for his life, for his honor, and for the soul of a boy he had killed 5 years ago. The dawn broke over the canyons, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red. A fierce wind was rising, howling through the narrow passes and kicking up clouds of stinging red dust. A sandstorm was coming. The air was thick and electric, a fitting atmosphere for the final confrontation. Cole rode into the designated canyon, a wide bowl-shaped arena of rock and sand. The wind was already a physical force, tearing at his clothes and forcing him to squint against the swirling grit. He saw Briggs waiting for him in the center of the basin, sitting on his horse, a dark, implacable figure against the storm-racked landscape. But something was wrong. Briggs wasn't alone. Hank and Roy were there, positioned on the rocks above, rifles in hand. And tied to a post near Briggs was a fourth figure. It was Deputy Finn. He was gagged, his face bruised, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fury. "You didn't really think I'd fight you fair, did you?" Hartman Briggs shouted over the wind's roar. "Fairness died with my brother." It was a trap, just as Cole had feared. A 3-on-1 fight with a hostage to ensure he couldn't simply flee. The sandstorm intensified, the world dissolving into a maelstrom of red dust and screaming wind. Visibility dropped to a few yards. The swirling chaos was disorienting, but for Cole, it was an opportunity. He was a master of this terrain. "Let the boy go," Briggs Cole yelled, his voice barely audible over the gale. "He goes when you're dead," Briggs retorted. Cole spurred Ranger, not toward Briggs, but toward the canyon wall, disappearing into the blinding curtain of sand. Briggs roared in frustration, firing his rifle into the dust cloud where Cole had been. The fight had begun. It was not a classic Western shootout, but a desperate game of cat and mouse in a world gone mad. Cole used his knowledge of the terrain, a map of gullies and rock formations etched into his memory. He dismounted, leaving Ranger in a sheltered crevice, and moved on foot, silent as a ghost in the storm. The wind masked his sounds, and the sand cloaked his movements. He could hear Briggs and his men shouting to each other, their voices distorted and carried away by the wind, their frustration mounting. He circled around, coming up behind Roy's position on the ridge. The nervous gunman was peering blindly into the storm, his rifle clutched tight. Cole came upon him from behind, a whisper in the wind. A single hard blow to the back of the head, and Roy slumped to the ground, unconscious. One down. He moved on the storm, his ally. He could hear Hank crashing through the brush below, a bull of a man relying on brute force. Cole found a narrow ledge above the path Hank was taking. As the big man passed beneath, Cole dislodged a cascade of loose rocks. The small avalanche caught Hank by surprise, sweeping his feet out from under him and sending him tumbling into a deep, thorny bush, where he lay tangled and groaning. 2 down. Now it was just Briggs. Cole made his way back to the basin. The storm was at its peak, a deafening, blinding fury. He could just make out Briggs's silhouette near the post where Finn was tied. Briggs was agitated, spinning in place, firing his pistol into the swirling sand, screaming Cole's name. "Come out and face me, you coward." Cole stepped out of the maelstrom, his Winchester held ready. "It's just you and me now, Briggs." Briggs whirled his face, a mask of hate. He raised his pistol, and the 2 men fired almost simultaneously. A bullet seared across Cole's arm, but his own shot was true, hitting the pistol in Briggs's hand and sending it flying into the dust. Briggs cried out in pain and rage, clutching his shattered hand. He was disarmed, but he wasn't defeated. With a roar, he drew a large hunting knife and lunged at Cole. The two men crashed together, a desperate, brutal struggle in the heart of the storm. They were no longer cowboys or lawmen. They were just two men driven by pain, fighting with fists and fury. It was then that Deputy Finn, having finally worked the gag from his mouth, screamed into the wind. Briggs, it was a lie. Both men froze, their fists locked. What Briggs snarled distracted for a critical moment. "Your brother!" Finn shouted, his voice raw. "I found the truth in the papers, Abernathy's journal. Your brother wasn't just trying to get the land back. He and Abernathy were secret partners. They were trying to scare your family off the land so Abernathy could get the mineral rights. But your brother got greedy. He threatened to expose Abernathy." The world seemed to stop, the roar of the wind fading to a dull hum in Briggs's ears. Finn delivered the final devastating blow. The coroner's report from that day. I had them send it from Santa Fe. The bullet that killed Thomas wasn't from the front. He was shot in the back. Abernathy betrayed him and shot him during the confusion of the shootout with Cole. Cole didn't kill him. Briggs Abernathy did. The secondary twist landed with the force of a physical impact. Briggs's entire quest for vengeance, the all-consuming hatred that had driven him for 5 years, was built on a lie. He hadn't been avenging a murdered innocent. He'd been hunting the wrong man while his brother's true killer lived as a respected land baron. The fight drained out of him. The knife slipped from his numb fingers. He stared at Cole, his eyes no longer filled with hate, but with a vast, hollow emptiness. He had built his life around a false memory. In that moment of stunned realization, Cole saw not a villain, but a broken man, his soul shattered by the truth. The sandstorm raged around them, a perfect echo of the storm inside Marcus Briggs's heart. In the aftermath of the storm, a fragile calm descended upon the canyon. The wind died down to a mournful whisper, and the red dust began to settle, revealing a landscape scoured clean. Cole stood, his arm bleeding freely, looking at the defeated man before him. Briggs had collapsed to his knees, his shoulders slumped, and the truth having broken him more completely than any bullet ever could. Cole walked over to Finn and cut him loose. The young deputy rubbed his raw wrists, his eyes fixed on Briggs. "It's true," Finn said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's all in Abernathy's own handwriting. He killed your brother to silence him." Briggs didn't respond. He remained kneeling in the dust, a statue of grief. Cole tended to Finn's injuries, first tearing a strip from his own shirt to bandage a cut on the deputy's head. The shared danger and the revealed truth had forged a bond between them, transforming them from a wary ex-lawman and an ambitious rookie into comrades. "What do we do with him?" Finn asked, nodding toward Briggs. Cole looked at the man who had tried to kill him, who had turned a town against him, and felt not hatred, but a profound pity. "We take him in," Cole said. "The law can sort it out now." They returned to Silver Creek, not as victor and vanquished, but as a somber procession. Cole wounded but walking tall. Finn bruised but with the confident bearing of a man who had proven himself. And Briggs, a prisoner of his own, shattered past, riding between them in silence. Hank and Roy were rounded up and locked in the town jail. The truth, when Finn presented it at a town meeting backed by Abernathy's own ledgers, and the official coroner's report, swept through Silver Creek like a cleansing fire. The townsfolk, led by a deeply ashamed Elias Boone, gathered outside the sheriff's office, where Cole was having his arm stitched by the town doctor. Cole Boone said, his voice thick with emotion, as he clasped Cole's good hand. "We were fools, blinded by fear and lies. Can you forgive us?" Cole looked out at the faces of his neighbors, the same people who had called for his arrest just a day before, and saw only shame and regret. "There's nothing to forgive," he said. "Fear makes people do foolish things." With the town's support, Deputy Finn, now acting with the full authority of the law, rode to the sprawling Abernathy ranch. He arrested the land baron, a man who had hidden his villainy behind a veneer of wealth and respectability for years. Abernathy's downfall was swift and total. He was brought to justice not just for the murder of Thomas Briggs, but for a lifetime of corruption and deceit. Finn, in that single act, ceased to be a boy playing at lawman and became the town's true protector. A week later, Cole stood on the porch of his ranch, his arm in a sling. He watched as two figures rode away from town. Marcus Briggs, having given a full confession and testimony against Abernathy, had received a lenient sentence. He was leaving the territory, a man stripped of his vengeance, seeking to build a new life out of the ruins of the old. Before leaving, he had asked to see Cole one last time. "I spent 5 years hating the wrong man," Briggs had said, his voice hollow. "I don't know how to live without that hate." "You start by finding something to live for," Cole had replied. Now, as Briggs disappeared over the horizon, Cole turned his attention to the corral. The silver mare and her foal were there, their wounds healed, their coats shining with health. They were his to keep. The town had insisted. But Cole knew they didn't belong to him any more than they had belonged to Briggs. Their legacy was written not on a deed, but in the wild, open spaces. He knew what he had to do. The following morning, Cole led the mare and her foal out from his ranch. He didn't ride north toward the open plains. Instead, he rode east toward a stretch of overgrown, forgotten land nestled between two mesas. It took half a day to get there. The homestead was long gone, collapsed into a pile of rotting timber, but the old stone foundation remained covered in weeds and wildflowers. A crumbling sign, barely legible, read, "Briggs Ranch." This was their ancestral land. Cole dismounted and walked the grounds, the mare and foal following him with quiet trust. Near a grove of ancient cottonwood trees, he found a small, unmarked mound of stones, nearly swallowed by the earth. Thomas Briggs's grave. He stood before it for a long time, the wind whispering through the leaves. The memory of that day in the canyon was no longer a hazy nightmare, but a clear, tragic picture. He saw the fear in the boy's eyes, felt the recoil of his own gun. He had been an instrument of the law, but the law had been blind. Slowly, Cole reached into his saddlebag and took out the old locked wooden box. He opened it and removed the Colt peacemaker, its metal gleaming. Beside it, wrapped in cloth, was his old U.S. Marshal's badge. He took the star-shaped piece of tin in his hand, its points pressing into his palm. It was a symbol of an identity he had shed, a life of violence he had tried to leave behind. It represented his pride, but also his deepest guilt. In a final, powerful symbolic act, he knelt and laid the badge on the unmarked grave. He was not just honoring the dead boy. He was letting go. He was releasing the weight of his past, the burden of the man he used to be. The cycle of guilt and revenge, started by a thief's greed and ended in a sandstorm, was finally broken. He stood and turned to the mare. He removed her halter, his fingers brushing against her soft muzzle one last time. "You're home," he whispered. He gave her a gentle slap on the flank. The mare tossed her head, her eyes bright with a wild intelligence. She gave a low nicker to her foal, and then together they moved away. They didn't bolt. They walked at first, then trotted their silver coats, catching the sunlight. As they reached the edge of the grove, they broke into a full gallop, running with the pure, unburdened joy of freedom. Cole watched until they were just two distant specks disappearing into the vastness of their reclaimed legacy. Months later, the rhythm of a peaceful life had returned to Cole Hartman. He was no longer a feared ex-marshal or a suspected outcast, but simply a rancher, a respected part of the Silver Creek community. One evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the land, he was mending a fence on the edge of his property. He worked with a steady, peaceful focus, the simple, honest labor a balm for his soul. He paused, stretching his back, and looked up at the high ridge that bordered his land. And there, standing silhouetted against the vibrant colors of the dying day, were two horses. One, a familiar shimmering silver gray, the other, darker, taller, its youthful frame filling out with strength. They stood motionless for a long moment, watching him. It was not a plea or a thank you, but a quiet acknowledgement, a shared understanding that passed across the distance. Cole smiled. He didn't need to be their protector anymore. He had found his own freedom just as they had. He lifted a hand in a slow final salute. The mare tossed her head, and then the two horses turned as one and galloped away, disappearing over the ridge into the untamed wild.